The Canadians can't stop winning. Does this have fantasy impact? Tune in to find out as we drop the puck.
Brings it way back in. Connor McDavid. Draisaitl scores!
Start the season in the high slot. It's Niederreiter. It's Hamilton. They score! Holy mackerel, what a save! Made by Mark Andreessen. This is absolutely unbelievable by Austin Matthews. A complete turnaround. We're going to Boston, baby!
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Antonio Capos along with my two co-hosts, Ben Rutledge and Owen Hamilton. How are you doing, guys?
I'm doing good today. How are you boys?
Good.
Big win from the Habs last night, huh?
Yeah, it's annoying as a Leafs fan, but it is what it is.
I don't think anybody predicted that as,
Fairness, if you do go
First
back and look at
round.
episode 2, I called Montreal beating Vegas. So let's just keep that in mind.
It's just interesting to see. Everybody said, okay, Leafs are going to sweep them. Jets are going to beat them. Vegas are going to sweep them. And they've come out of each round and just been able to win. And now they're going on to the finals against whoever wins tonight of Tampa and the Isles.
The annoying part is I know they're going to win the cup if it's the Islanders. I just know they are.
I don't know. They're similar teams in my eyes. Like, they're both like,
Well, Vegas isn't that dissimilar. Vegas is just a better version of what Montreal does. That's what, if you break down who they've played. So I guess they played the Leafs who were really good, but if the Leafs had a killer instinct, they beat them. Like, let's be real. The Jets are playing awful. That's what I'm saying. The killer instinct. The Jets are playing awful before the playoffs. They just happened to sweep the Oilers, and so everyone thought they were back. And then Vegas is different. So if you just imagine it, if the Leafs were Colorado, they're done in 5. Like, Colorado doesn't lose game 5, 6, and 7. And so that's why I think if they play Tampa Bay, because Tampa Bay is very similar to the Leafs, but has the killer instinct, then I think they don't stand a chance if it's Tampa Bay.
I don't know. I think they could do their thing again. I'm never going to bet against them again because I think they're going to prove me wrong.
Also, let's just keep in mind William Nylander scored 6 goals in the first round against the Canadians, and the Canadians don't have a single player over 5 goals right now.
I mean, but where did that land the Leafs? And where?
I'm just saying. And I'm also saying that the Montreal Canadiens, if you took their point percentage, would be the second worst team in NHL history to win the Stanley Cup. All right, so let's move on to our opening segment, our Seattle expansion draft predictions. So before we start this quickly, we're doing this through Cap Friendly. We're going to be doing the first 15 teams this episode and the next 15 next week. And what we did is we just went in and we did quick protect using Cap Friendly, just so Cap Friendly chooses who we're doing it. And then Antonio and I will then pick from each team where we're pretending there's 2 expansion teams, and then we pick from each team creating our roster.
Yeah, we're going head to head. We did a coin toss, and I'm going to be starting with the first pick for Anaheim. And this is going to be part of a 2-part segment where today, like you said, we're doing the first 15, and for next week we'll be doing the next 15. It's generally just because the amount of news happening around the league is a little bit lower right now because 2 teams left playing in the playoffs, and there's not a lot of the draft isn't anywhere close yet. And even the Seattle expansion draft is still about a month away. So I don't think there's going to be much going around the league in the coming couple weeks.
I agree. And so just for everyone, quick rules of how the expansion draft works. So you have to, obviously you'll draft 30 30 players, 14 forwards, 9 defense, 3 goalies. And you need at least 20 contracts that will start next year. Like you need to draft at least 20 players who have a contract next year, and you're allowed to draft 3 unrestricted free agents. RFAs don't go towards that. You can draft an RFA, but they obviously won't go towards that 20 minimum needed for the 2022, 2023, or 2021, 2022 season. Sorry. But you can draft them. There's no limit. And then 3 UFAs are allowed. So, Antonio, if you'd like to kick us off with the Anaheim Ducks.
Alrighty. I'm going to be taking Brendan Gould. Young defenseman. I think he just needs a bit of a change of scenery. Could be a top 4 defenseman for Seattle.
Okay, and I will be taking Hayden Fleury from the Anaheim Ducks.
All right.
Okay, so now I get first pick from Arizona, and I will be taking Michael Bunting.
All right. And I will take, looking through the names here. I'm just thinking strategically whether I should be taking a forward or a defenseman here. I think I will actually take Aiden Hill here as my backup goalie. Moving on to the Bruins. I'm going to be taking I'll take Jeremy Lauzon. Actually, no, sorry. I'll take Jeremy Lauzon as a left defenseman. Probably play another top 4 defenseman for me.
Okay, and I'm going to be using one of my UFAs, and I'll be taking Taylor Hall.
All right.
Okay, now from Buffalo, I will be taking Rasmus Asplund. He is an RFA, so it doesn't count towards my UFA, but won't count as one of my 20 contracts needed. Same thing for Michael Bunting as well.
All right. I'm going to be taking Buffalo is such a bad team.
I know they are. That was so hard for me to find anyone.
I think I'll take Jurgensen's as sorry. I'm not going to waste a UFA on Jurgensen.
No, he's a UFA in 2023, so you're fine.
Oh yeah, we're good. Okay. Moving on to Calgary. I will take Shillington.
Okay, he's an RFA. And I will take Chris Tanev.
All right.
All right, now moving on to Carolina. Oh, I will take RFA Alex Nedeljkovic. Now, I do expect them to protect him, but at least right now in cap friendly, he is not protected when you use quick protect.
All right. I'm kind of going D heavy here, but I'm taking Brady Skay.
Yeah, that's the other person. I was actually going to say him first, and I saw that Nedeljkovic was there.
Moving on to Chicago.
Man. Chicago's awful.
Yeah, I think just because I need to, I'll take Malcolm Subban.
Oh, gosh. That literally leaves. I guess I'll take Riley Stillman just because he has the most potential out of anyone there.
All right, here's Colorado.
Okay.
I think it's a pretty easy pick for you.
Yeah. Same thing as with Nedeljkovic. I do think that this guy will be protected, but at least using quick protect, Devon Taves is not protected, so I will take him.
And I will take Ryan Graves. I'm pretty sure. I need to really look to pick forwards more in the coming rounds because I am very D heavy here. Moving on to Columbus. I'm gonna take Grigorenko.
Okay. He is a UFA, so just remember that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I kind of need to take a forward here.
Okay, and I'll be taking Gabriel Carlson. He's an RFA, so that's fine. Okay, now moving on
The Dallas.
to Dallas. Goodness, there is. I'll take Anton Kudobin.
Interesting. That's interesting to me. I'm gonna take Jason Dickinson. He's an RFA this year, so that's fine. But I definitely thought you were gonna go for like an Alexiak or someone.
No, because he's a UFA, so I'm not gonna take a UFA pick on him. Okay, your pick first for Detroit.
I think I'm gonna take Taro Hirose.
Yeah, it's not a bad pick. Okay, and then just looking at their team, I'll take a similar route as you, and I'll go Giovanni Smith, an RFA.
Oh shoot, sorry. Hirose is a UFA. I'm not gonna waste a UFA pick on him, so I'll take Adam Earn.
Okay, then my first pick here.
Edmonton.
I'll take Josh Archibald.
Okay. Just looking at my cap hit, I'm currently only at 18.4.
I'm at 25.8.
11 teams in, so I think here might be a good. I'm thinking here to possibly take James Neal, but I'm trying to figure out if that's the best pick. Because I feel like I don't really want to have that contract on my books, but there's like no depth on Edmonton. I'll take Tyler Benson actually. He's an RFA.
Okay, now moving on to Florida, taking a first pick, but I just want to jump in and say something here. We did say that we thought the Panthers were going to waive Keith Yandel's no move clause. And so just say that ahead of time. All right, Anthony, it's your pick now.
Okay, this is actually a hard pick for me. There's two people I'm looking at right now. Thinking about how I don't necessarily have a starting quality goalie, I'm going to go for Chris Drieger here. Oh, sorry, he's a UFA. I'm not going to waste a UFA pick on him, so I'll end up taking Sam Bennett.
Yeah, that's who I assume you're going to take. So I'll take Mason Marchment then. Actually, right. No, I'm going to take Noel Achari.
Interesting pick.
Okay,
on to LA. It's your pick here.
Oh yeah. All right, now for LA, I'll take Brendan Lemieux.
All right, I'm gonna take Trevor Moore. He's an RFA.
All right, your pick for Minnesota.
I'm gonna take Matt Dumba here.
Yeah, that's what I was probably gonna take. All right, so I'll take Ryan Hartman.
Really? I thought you were gonna take Victor Rask, maybe.
No, he's not that good, and he's older.
All right. On to Montreal, your pick.
Okay, so this will be our last team, Montreal. Actually, no, I believe 15 teams is Minnesota. So that will conclude our opening segment. Our opening half of the Seattle expansion draft.
Just to review, for me, my two goalies are Malcolm Subban and Aiden Hill. I have drafted 6D so far, being Oliver Shillington, who's a lefty, Brendan Gould, lefty, Jeremy Lauzon, who's a flex D, so I'll probably end up playing him on the right. Graves is a lefty, Brady Skate is a lefty, and Matt Dumba is a right D. And then for my forward group, I have 7 forwards: Mikhail Grigorenko from Columbus, Sam Bennett, Tyler Benson, Jason Dickinson, Adam Ernie, Trevor Moore, and Jurgensen from Buffalo.
All right, and so for me, I've taken 2 goalies, Alex Nedeljkovic and Anton Khudobin, 5 defensemen, Hayden Fleury on the right, Chris Tanev on the left, Riley Stillman on the right, Devon Taves on the left, and Gabriel Carlson on the left. And then I've taken 8 forwards on the left wing: Michael Bunting, Taylor Hall, Giovanni Smith, and Brendan Lemieux. Down the middle, Rasmus Asplund and Ryan Hartman. And on the right, Josh Archibald and Noel Achari.
Now to the Ozone with Owen Hamilton.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ozone. So the first topic I'm going to be covering today is the topic that everyone has been talking about. I mean, the Montreal Canadiens are in the Stanley Cup. Like, last Ozone, I was, celebrating the fact that the Canadiens have made it to the conference finals. They've been the underdog in every series and have still found their way to have a historic run and make the Stanley Cup. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, Carey Price, he deserves this so much. I think everyone knows that. I definitely would like to see the Canadiens win. I'd love to see Price get his ring. But yeah, I mean, it really, I said a few Ozones ago, they were seeming like true contenders, but I never really understood how right I was. I mean, I said that and then proceeded to count them out against Vegas, and I guess that's just the lesson we've all learned, is that you can't count Carey Price out, and it's not even just Carey Price and his astonishing performance. I mean, Vegas did kind of collapse. Like, I definitely don't think Vegas should have lost this series. It was kind of embarrassing, and obviously I'm not trying to discredit the Canadiens, even though it sounds like I am, but I mean, truly, the Vegas did collapse, and that is unfortunate. But over with what we don't know is the fact that Lightning, Islanders, who's going to win that game will be actually decided today. By the time you're listening to this, it might already be happening, or it might already have happened, but I don't know, man. I really don't know anymore with the NHL. This has been a very, very interesting playoffs. I've been very excited to see what's happened, and I'm really excited to see that Stanley Cup matchup. Thank you guys so much for listening, and this has been the Ozone. Take care.
Let's talk strategy. All right, I know last time we talked about how in the first 5 rounds, it's really sure shot the players you're going to take. You can't really draft a bad team based on just the first 5 rounds. Like, obviously, there's going to be ways that you could do that, but if you're following, like, just the general fantasy app rankings, you're not going to draft a bad team in those first 5 rounds. However, it's very important to go in having a strategy to build your team. For instance, when I go into a draft, I generally look in the first round. I'm never going to take a defenseman, never going to take a goalie. It's always going to be a forward. I generally prefer to have a winger in the first round just because there's a lot more depth at center than there is at forward, just because that's where most of the talent in the league is based. So I usually look to go like first round winger. Second or third round, I'm going to take a defenseman. The other pick is either going to be a winger or a center. It flip-flops in the third round, obviously. Fourth round is just filling in the gaps. I want to have basically one person at left wing, one person at center, one person at right wing, and basically probably 2D after 5 rounds. But generally, if I take a defenseman in like say the second or third, if I take one in the second round, I'm probably not going to pick another defenseman until like the 8th round, just because I want to build up my forward group now that I have like a solid defenseman, like a top 5 defenseman in the league. And so I want to build up my forwards, and then I can later build on my already like decent defense core.
Yeah, I agree. And I find there's kind of two strategies you can go. You can go the way Antonio said, where you take your one defenseman early, or you can take a strategy that I took in our startup dynasty league this year, where I punted on defense and took them at the end of the top 100. And I went all forwards. For example, I went Matthews, Huberdeau, Eichel, Nylander, Ehlers with my first 5 picks. Like, I took 5 straight up 5 forwards. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. I'd probably recommend taking a defenseman. It's just sometimes the way the draft works out, you don't end up sitting in a spot to take a good defenseman. And I think for defense, especially in those first 5 rounds, there's no point in reaching for one, because there's just way too much talent to reach at that point. And so, yeah, we intended to mention that last podcast. We just got a bit sidetracked talking about players, and so we just wanted to start with that. Now, moving on to the title of our podcast, round 6 to 10. This is where you really
Just
make or
quickly
break your
before
draft.
we dive into this, I just want to talk about our goalie tiers. This is obviously going to be on our document that you can find linked in our bio for Instagram. I really only have 2 goalies that you can take, in 2 or 3 goalies that you would even be taking in the first 5 rounds, in like Vasilevsky, Hellebuck, Rask, Grubauer. I don't really think that it's reasonable to take anybody else. Personally, I don't generally take goalies high. I'm the type of guy that's like, okay, I'm going to take my starting goalie in like round 10, and then I'll take a backup in like a backup, like 2 backups basically in like the last 3-4 rounds.
Yeah, I agree. Overall, I'm a little bit different. I like taking a starter a bit earlier, around round 8, because I like that the plan of just having like one true goalie who when they come up will most of the time succeed for you. And for defense, the key rounds we believe to take a defenseman is between rounds 7 and 10. I will just briefly list off the players who we have in our mock draft going to between 7 and 10 of the defensemen. So we have Pietrangelo, Chabot, Uyghur, Taves, Pionk, Nurse, Riley, Letang, Martinez, Petrie, Barry, Provorov, Klingberg, Spurgeon, and Doughty. So realistically, if you have 4 picks there. If you're taking 3 defensemen there and you're ending up with 4 of those defensemen, you're pretty happy overall. Sorry, and we have Ekblad there too. You're pretty happy if that's what you're ending up with, and so that's why we think really the best strategy is to either take a defenseman in the second round and wait, or you can wait entirely and just fill up your defenseman without that true number one, because the forwards obviously have more scoring potential than D do. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I did last year. It worked out for me pretty well. Ben and I ended up being the top 2 teams in our league. Ben inevitably taking me in the finals. All of that was based on because I had, I think, about 6 Bruins on my team, and in that last week, the Bruins like sat their whole team for a couple games.
One game, and can we keep in mind that I had the Leafs, who actually still played less games than the Bruins did. I had Matthews, Tavares, Nylander, Riley, Muzzin, and Campbell, and you had like the Bruins top line plus 2 others, and they still played more games than my Leafs. So keep that in mind.
Right. Anyway, I was able to build up the Bruins top line because I didn't take a defenseman in the top 5 rounds, and I just waited and waited. And then I ended up taking like a run on like 4 defensemen from like rounds 8 to 11, where I took players like I took, who was it? I ended up having a decent defense core. It wasn't necessarily like a league winning defense core, obviously, because I waited on them. But later in the year, if you find that your defense is a little bit lacking, you're then able to trade some of that star power for a defenseman. These star players generally have a good amount of value, and you can use them as trade bait. For instance, I ended up at the end of the year trading. I ended up trading McDavid because I knew that his schedule wasn't good in the coming weeks. I traded him for Rantanen and Fox. I obviously had to. I think I had to throw in like one extra saver.
No, the trade was you got Fox because you traded to Foley and Spurgeon, I believe, for Fox because the guy was kind of already out of it and he didn't really care. And then you traded McDavid and Shea Theodore
for Rantanen,
Thomas Chabot, Roman Josi, and Mikko Rantanen.
Yeah. So basically, I was able to make the best defensive core in the league because I had good forwards. Obviously, having McDavid is going to be a good part of getting a good trade to go in your favor. However, let's get into the actual players we have going from round 6 to 10.
Just quickly, I wanted to jump in. I took the kind of opposite strategy. I actually took Hedman and Pietrangelo both within my top 5 picks last year. No, I find that really helped me because I ended up grabbing Muzzin, Weber, Pionk, and Riley later. So I was set up for D the entire season. Like I actually didn't touch my D core after the draft. And I found that was like a decent strategy, but I just found that in certain weeks, my forward core would lack. And so that's why I wouldn't suggest taking 2. Taking 1 for sure is probably the way to go. I wouldn't take 2 because you just want to build up those forward core. But also if you don't want to take a defenseman early because you think you can get good value later, that's when it makes sense to take a Vasilevsky or a Hellebuck within those first 5 picks, I think. Just because you're going to get a true number 1 goalie in the league, possibly like a possible Vezina winner. And so you've set yourself up well, just in a different way. All right, so now on to our players.
All right, so featured in the 6th round, we both have Suzuki there. We both have Seth Jones. We both have Teravainen. Basically, the bottom 5 rounds in the top 100 is a lot based on opinion, and whether you think that their upside is going to outweigh their like floor. For example, Steven Stamkos was injured a good amount of the year this year, and he's getting older. So it's about saying, well, we know he was an elite player. Is he going to continue this? And then like kind of waging your bet on whether he's going to regress to the point where he's not worth this pick, or if he has a possibility of maintaining his like star status and being a very solid pick here in the later rounds.
And yeah, so I find for me the 6th round is when you take someone, depending on what you've taken. I still find that the 6th round is the best upside round in my opinion. So for example, in the 6th round, I have Teravainen, Reinhart, Batherson, Suzuki, Theodore. Those are just kind of the more high upside players. And I find that all of those players, if you're getting in the 6th round, Batherson maybe a bit less so, but all of them have a good floor and their upside is top 5 round worthy. And so that's why we just find that those guys, that this is, at least me personally, this is where I like to take my more high upside players, maybe a bit lower floor. If you find that you've taken people with lower floor in the first 5 rounds and you want to take someone more like a Toffoli or a Palat or a Backstrom or a Hyman who's more well known, just because you need to stabilize your team. But odds are you can't really go wrong with anyone in the top 5 rounds, and so that's why taking a high upside player in the 6th round before you start to move into your defenseman picks is kind of the way to go, I think.
Right. I think so too. Um, I think if I were to go back and redraft this year, I might have taken Suzuki or Caulfield. Now seeing what they've done in the playoffs, obviously before the playoffs, they were kind of question marks just because they looked like at best a second or third line players, which don't necessarily, they're usually not league winning in fantasy if we just put it that way. But they just look like possible like bottom like teen round picks. Now obviously they're going to go a little bit higher based on what we've seen in the playoffs. So just for those people that are going to be drafting in the coming months, just know that the playoffs do matter. And even though we maybe didn't have them ranked quite as high before the playoffs, we're definitely updating our rankings constantly. And even like what we said of our rankings last episode, they're going to be changed like just a little bit based on what we've seen in more recent games in the playoffs. For instance, Kucherov getting injured, that's not good. Obviously, he's had a history of injuries. He was out for basically all year this year, and that could affect his fantasy value next year if he's going to have to be out for part of the season. Moving on to like rounds 7 through 10. Ben, do you want to take this?
Yeah, so I'll kind of jump in here. This is where I find I like to take my possibly number 1, likely number 2 defenseman is in this round. When we did our fantasy drafts here in round 7, I took Neil Pionk. Currently, I have him ranked at 68 overall, and so this is where I took Pionk. I just love his upside. Morrissey really struggled in the playoffs. Pionk not as much, and Pionk's better defensively, gets more minutes overall. So I think that he has a chance to take over that number 1 Jets power play, if not at least split it. I believe that's what they're doing at the end of the playoffs, which really isn't good for Morrissey's value because that's really the only reason he even had some decent value. But yeah, I think for me, actually right now, if I looked at my rankings, I only have Matthew Tkachuk, Anze Kopitar, and Martin Necas in this round. So I only have 3 forwards in this round, 7 defensemen. Granted, in our rankings, we don't have goalies. This is where you can kind of start to think about your first goalie as well. For example, more in the tier of Jack Campbell, Tuukka Rask, Semyon Varlamov, UC Saros, Alex Nedeljkovic. This is where you start to think about them now. We'll have a separate segment on our goalie tiers and just more goalie drafting strategy. But for player drafting strategy, this is really the best value for defensemen, and this is really the biggest area where you can kind of start to fix your defense core or put it together.
Yeah, right. For example, I think I took a defenseman actually in the 6th round. It was kind of abnormal for me, but I just wanted, I think really highly of McAvoy, and I wanted to make sure that I was going to get him, so I chose to take him. Then I followed him up with like a Quinn Hughes. And then I think I said, okay, I have Quinn Hughes, Makar, and McAvoy. I'm pretty happy with my group so far, and so I continued drafting forwards at that point and just waited until like the teen rounds to draft a defenseman again because my defensive core was already like I think the best in the league at that point. Obviously, it kind of slowed down as other teams drafted more defensemen, and I waited and waited, just drafting forwards.
But yeah, really the defense really falls off after around 15 or 16 or so. We'll get into that later. But that's why we really think that you have to have at least 3. If you don't have 3 D-core coming out of the top 100, your D-core is a bit in trouble.
Right.
And so realistically, I think for the top 10 rounds, my ideal team coming out of it is 6 forwards, 3 defense, 1 goalie is my ideal team coming out of the top 10 because then I think you're overall well spread out. You won't have too many gaps. And obviously that'll change based on who you see falling. Like if you're sitting in the 10th round and you're like, I really need a defenseman, but someone like Travis Konechny has fallen and you're still in the 10th round, like you have to scoop him up. I think. And
Yeah, like
that's why.
seasoned fantasy drafters will know, even though say I'm in the 7th round and I have like one defenseman, even though I'm looking to draft, like go on a run and draft like 2 or 3 defensemen now, if somebody were to drop, like we have to like counterweight the value of the forwards and defensemen there. Like say the best defenseman there for some reason was Mark Giordano. You're obviously not going to take him over, like say if like a Kevin Fiala was there. You're not gonna take Mark Giordano over Kevin Fiala. Obviously, those guys would not be in this like your best options in the 7th round. But it's just highlighting how you have to overall like there's a point when even though you need a certain position, the fantasy value just outweighs that because you can just go out and after the draft end up probably trading for somebody if you get enough value on your team.
Yeah, and I agree. That's why I think the overall ranking system as a whole is it's a bit harder to gauge who you think you should take because you're sitting there and you're like, you need a defenseman, and Nick Backstrom's there, but so is Thomas Chabot, and you're like, well, I need a defenseman, and Nick Backstrom in my rankings is 58, Thomas Chabot is 61. You're like, okay, so I'm only losing 3 picks. But realistically, if you look at the entire point totals that they'll put up, like Backstrom will be higher. If Obi resigns, you shouldn't be passing on Backstrom to take Thomas Chabot. So that's why I think the best thing to do is you can use our overall rankings that are updated, so you don't have to do one yourself, and then you should do your own personal tier rankings because that way you'll be able to think, okay, Nick Backstrom is a tier 5 forward, Thomas Chabot is a tier 7 defenseman. Why would I pass up on the tier 5 for tier 7, even though I have needs? Because odds are, if you're picking towards the end, then you'll come up again, and then Chabot starts to have that better value. And so that's why that's always something to look out for. And then obviously,
I also think that like obviously before each pick, I wouldn't just have one guy lined up. I found myself like queuing one person before my pick, and then maybe they're taking 1 or 2 picks ahead of me, and then you're just scrambling for that like minute 30 that you have in your draft time. So I always have like 2 or 3 guys lined up. So I'm like, okay, at this point it's my pick. I'm choosing between these 2 guys. I'm happy with either of them. Like you was talking about Chabot, Backstrom. I actually don't think you can go wrong between those 2 players. They're pretty similar in value in my eyes because I actually picked Chabot in his breakout year, so I'm very fond of him. But yeah, I think he's still really young on an up and coming Ottawa team, so I think that he could arguably have more value than Backstrom. Obviously, you were just giving an example, but
and yeah, Dynasty's a bit different too. Like I think for Dynasty, waiting on defensemen is almost a strategy. Like if you can't get really McCarr or Fox at this point, wait on defensemen. Because for example, I waited on defensemen and my decor right now isn't looking too strong. However, my prospect defensemen are Bowen Byram, Noah Dobson, Rasmus Sandin, and Jamie Drysdale, and I picked them all up in the mid-teen rounds of my dynasty draft, like yearly dynasty draft. And so even though my defense core might be lacking right now, if you can have that level of D prospect coming up, then that's really the strategy to go because then you already have your set forward core and you have an up and coming D core. And so that's why I think for Dynasty, the strategy changes a fair bit. And so obviously, but for the top 10 Dynasty or restart, or Dynasty or yearly, the draft strategy is pretty much the same as we've been covering over and over again. And so just as we're beginning to wrap up here, what we'll do is, so for each round, we'll list the ideal position, not player, position we'll get for the top 10. And then that will conclude our podcast. So for the first round, I'm going forward, Antonio.
yeah, I'll go. I would go forward there. I'd go winger actually if I could, unless I have a top 3 pick in like McDavid, Matthews, McKinnon.
Yeah, I agree with that. Second round, I'm going winger. What about you?
I go defense usually in the second round. Like if I can get a Makar or Fox. So say I have like a top 5 pick in the second round, I'll go defense. But if it's a bottom 5, then I'll either go like if like an Eichel drops to me or like I'll go winger otherwise unless there's like a good center there.
Okay, and then for round three, I would also go forward here just because the defense starts to drop off a bit. And so, Antonio, what about you?
I usually like flip flop between the second and third round. I'll either take a defenseman in the second or in the third. I usually don't go like 3 rounds without drafting a defenseman. So, say I didn't get a defenseman in the second round, I might take like a Hedman in the third round just because we were in a dynasty league this year, so his value's a little lower because he's older.
And then round 4 for me, I go defenseman just because looking at my rankings, I have Yossi, Hughes, and Hamilton all in that round 4 territory, and so that's where I would take them.
For me, this is where I'm pretty sure I took Bergeron here. So yeah, I usually go a forward here in the 4th round. Same with the 5th round. I took another forward here, and I think it was Forsberg I ended up taking here. Or no, sorry, it was I think I took Kyle Connor here actually in our draft.
All right, then round 5, 6, I'm going forward here.
Yeah, I think I go forward defenseman normally.
And then round 7, 8, I go defenseman goalie. So now I have through 8 rounds, I have four forwards, 2 defense, 1 goalie.
7. Are we talking 7, 8 here? I think 7, 8. I go defenseman. So I go like 6, 7, 8. I get defenseman, and so I'm currently sitting with.
Sorry, I actually have 5 forwards, 2 defense, 1 goalie. And then for rounds 9, 10, I tend to go. My plan typically is to go defense, but round 10 is when you can see people dropping. We're not talking about who we took. We're talking about your ideal draft strategy.
Right. So I would go for like in the first 8 rounds, I'm usually taking 3 defensemen.
And I typically
and then
take
for
2.
round 8, I would take a forward. Round 9, probably another defenseman. And round 10 is where I take my goalie just because I like waiting on goalies. For example, somebody I got there was Leonard, but we'll go more in depth into goalie tier rankings probably next video.
All right. So I think that's pretty helpful for everyone listening. That's kind of how we tend to draft. We've done a fair bit of fantasy hockey drafts over our time, and that's kind of the strategies we think have worked out. If you guys have any different draft strategies that you'd like us to comment on, just DM us at Fantasy Hockey Pucks, no cap, no space, and we'll get back to you.
As soon as we get, I think our target is for like around 100 followers to start taking questions for each video that we will then be answering in the video.
And we'll begin to use Instagram lives as well.
And also, even last year, we started answering questions in the DM. For instance, there was somebody that messaged us and we helped him kind of giving him our early rankings. Same thing goes this year. Obviously, our rankings are already up on our Instagram, linked in our link tree at Fantasy Hockey Pucks. If you have any other questions,
as well.
If you have any other questions about certain scoring,
as well,
you can DM us like Ben said, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
And yeah, the exact rankings that we've been using for all of our episodes are linked in our link tree at our Fantasy Hockey Pucks website. You have everything there for each positional ranking like we've covered before. And yeah.
We also have extra things there, like we have team rankings where we go through like top 10 players for each team, positional rankings where we have like top 25 in each forward position, and then we have a top 50 in defense, and our goalie tiers that we'll be covering next episode. That's going to wrap it up for us. Thanks everyone again for watching. And be sure to meet us back here next week, same time, same place, when we talk about our mock draft for the NHL draft the next time we drop the puck.